All right, so what does an opening week loss mean to Notre Dame or Ohio State or to Georgia or to Oregon? We're going to talk about that here on Up to the Second College Football. Year number 2 of this show, episode 1. I am David Nuño. She is Kennedy Smith joining us on the show, and this is presented to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors, and they want to remind you to have fun out there with Academy. Kennedy, you're joining the show for the first time, and I'm happy to have you here.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for inviting me on this season. Sitting here at this desk, it's just getting me so excited for college football starting this weekend. So run me through what are some storylines that we're going to be working with today.
So we have a lot of big games going on this week, obviously, and I think the Ohio State-Notre Dame game is a huge one. What does an opening week loss mean to Notre Dame? Because I am predicting Ohio State to mop the floor with them. They're one of the best teams in college football, but people have been saying the demise of Notre Dame is coming, yet here they are once again. They're in the top 5. And they got Marcus Freeman, who a lot of people are high on. I'll be interested to see how they do there. Over there, we've got the Oregon game against Georgia. Dan Lanning obviously came from Georgia. Now he's at Oregon. He's got Bo Nix as his quarterback. How's that going to play out? I think Georgia could run big in that one. So those are some of the storylines I'm tracking, along with everything happening in the SEC and beyond, Kennedy.
Yeah, David, on today's show, we are going to have some great guests. We've got Dennis Dodd from CBS Sports, along with some insiders from Georgia, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Arkansas. So stay tuned because this is Up to the Second College Football.
We're starting off the show in style. Dennis Dodd of CBS Sports joining us here on Up to the Second College Football. And there's a lot of marquee games I want to get into with him as the season does start. Week 1. Dennis, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Great to be here. I am ready for some ball. How are you?
I'm doing great. I want to start things off with the Ohio State-Notre Dame game because, man, like I have a feeling that Ohio State is so much better than most of the teams in college football that I don't even see this as a matchup. But Notre Dame is one of those teams that people keep trying to knock off, yet they're still, in the top 5, and Marcus Freeman doing a really good job there. How do you see this game playing out?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to make a case for Notre Dame. Marquee matchup of the brands, as you mentioned. But what's the numbers? 14.5, maybe up to 17 now. I think that's about right. I think Notre Dame's a little bit overrated at 5. I mean, you're telling me that team with a quarterback who's really never played much is one step away from a playoff? I don't think so. And you're right about Ohio State. Even if they hadn't fixed the defense, and they did with Jim Knowles, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, they could outscore their way to a playoff berth. And I think they're just absolutely loaded. They're maybe just a tick behind Alabama. This is what Ohio State looked like in 19 when they lost that championship game to Alabama. And maybe they should have won that year, but now they've got the defense fixed. They're absolutely loaded.
I feel like I can do a copy and paste here about these thoughts about the Oregon-Georgia game. Georgia, it's hard to tell how they're going to be because of so many new faces, yet they are the defending national champions. They do have Stetson Bennett coming back, who found his groove at the end of last season. Can you make a case for Oregon or no?
Not Saturday. In the first game Dan Lanning has ever coached, much like Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame, but in the belly of the beast in Atlanta, in Georgia's ancestral home, in Mercedes Benz, that's going to be tough. With a Bo Nix sighting, I think Georgia knows enough about Bo Nix to take him on. So no, I mean, I think it's going to be. Look, if Alabama wasn't around, and that's a bold statement, we'd be talking about Georgia going for 2 in a row. I think they can get into the Final Four, but look what they've got coming back with Bennett, a guy who didn't take a snap in the 2021 spring, didn't take a snap. Now he owns the world. He'll never have to pay for a meal again in Athens. And by the way, he's a pretty damn good quarterback. I mean, he throws that down the silo with 10 minutes left against Alabama for the game-winning score. And the season he had, I think he was among the top 3 or 5 or passing rating, which people don't really pay attention to, but is a good measure. He's the man. And I think they've got a great tight end room, maybe the best in the country. The receivers, Kyrus Jackson and Brock Bowers, obviously, lining up all over the field is great. They're going to run the ball. And the defense was generational last year. Let's just say they go down to a top 10 defense, which I think they'll be. That's still pretty good. Georgia's damn good.
Arkansas and Cincinnati. Cincinnati also losing guys, but they don't have SEC depth. So when you think about this matchup and where Arkansas's arrow is kind of pointing, how do you see it playing out?
Yeah, I'm really high on Arkansas this year. I just get the whole Sam Pittman thing. He's just such a good guy, and that doesn't win you football games necessarily, but the buy-in there is incredible. And they've got weapons with KJ Jefferson. They're going to be very physical offensively. Cincinnati coming off the best season they've ever had, and yeah, they missed the quarterback. They missed Sauce Gardner at cornerback. They're not going to be as good. I think they may be able to hang in under the number, but I like Arkansas to maybe finish as high as second in the West if everything goes right. A&M looks like that team right now, but if everything goes right and they win the key matchups, they could be as high as second or third. So not much of a game there either.
I didn't think I would be talking to you about the University of Houston and UTSA this early in an interview, but since we did talk Cincinnati, Houston could be this year's Cincinnati if you look at their schedule, but that's a tough matchup to start off.
It is, and as long as we're going to talk about Houston, we should talk about UTSA, because if they end up being that highest ranked group of 5 teams, they could get to a New Year's Six bowl. Houston, if they win them all, could be in consideration for the CFP, and I love what Dana Holgerson's been there. Nobody talks about him as one of the top football minds in the country, even though he comes from the Mike Leach tree. But they've got weapons. Clayton Tune at quarterback, Doug Belk, the defensive coordinator who came from Alabama. I love him. Nathaniel Dell is the best receiver, their leading receiver from last year, and I think they're going to be the Cincinnati of last year. Not necessarily get into the playoff, because I don't know if their schedule has enough quality teams on that for the committee to get them in, but certainly a New Year's Six candidate if they can win them all.
Dennis, let's talk about these new quarterbacks in the SEC. Who do you think is set up for the most success here this season?
Ooh, new quarterbacks in the SEC. Certainly not Florida. Kentucky's got Will Levis coming back. But that's one of the talking points of the entire league. The new guys coming back. Missouri's got a guy. Eli Drinkwitz went after JT Daniels. He went after Spencer Rattler. He didn't sign them. It might be Spencer Rattler. He ended up at a place where it didn't seem like a good fit, just schematically, if nothing else, culturally. He's an Arizona guy. He's a West Coast guy. South Carolina didn't run his stuff. He's bought into a more pro-style offense. I was at I was in Arizona when he was visiting home, and he spoke to a bunch of campers with his quarterback coach, like 8th and 9th graders, and he diagrammed a play from South Carolina that had 13 numbers in place to describe it, 13 numbers and words. That's what he called in the huddle to describe it. He said there were times at Oklahoma where he said one word, and like it meant all verts, but whatever it was. But in the air raid, it was one word. So that's different. He's bought into that. He's going to be under center. I like the upside of Shane Beamer, who really showed out his first year, doing what he did. And in this next year with a fire starter at quarterback, they're going to upset a couple of people. So maybe it's Spencer Rattler.
What about Haynes King? He's not necessarily a new face, but he is because of the injury so early on last year.
Yeah, he had those 5 quarters last year, before being hurt, a little bit even before that in 2020. I think this was the guy that I think a lot of people always thought was going to get the job. Number 7 dual threat out of high school, showed flashes last year. And really the season kind of revolved around him, getting injured. Zach Calzada, engineered the upset against Alabama, but didn't win the job at Auburn. So I think Haynes King is the guy that is going to keep them in the conversation for one of those top 4. Again, you see Texas A&M rated as high as 4 by some people. My question with Texas A&M is not Haynes King. I think he's going to be fine. They've got plenty of offensive weapons, but for A&M really to come through and this not be a gap year until a big 2023, 8 5-stars. How many of those are going to have to play? I asked Jimbo that, and he said, well, some of them will play. Some of them have to play or else they'll leave. They only want to be there 3 years. So I think that's a little bit too much to expect in year one from that recruiting class, as great as it is. Now, if you talk about this being a gap year and going backpacking in Europe and finding yourself before you go back to school and come back in 2023 and pursue a national championship, Absolutely. I think it could be that. I think it could be second place in the West. I think it could be 9 wins at most, but not this year. But it will be fun to watch Haynes game.
All right, let's close it up with a similar question. Which head coach in his first year is set up for the most success?
In overall?
Yeah, just overall in college football. Yes, sir.
Oh, gosh, there's 31 of them. It might be Lincoln Riley. Now, that's saying a lot. They were 4-8 last year, USC. But there are people legitimately talking about USC not only winning the Pac-12. I will entertain that. But getting into the playoff, I will not entertain that. But there's something bigger at work here. He flipped that roster in a period of 6 weeks when he arrived in early December. 43 new guys. If they're all on scholarship, and they are, that's half the scholarships being flipped in a month and a half. I don't have to tell you the players they've got. But I think there's upside not only this year, but in years to come, restoring what USC was. I think, possibly denting that a little bit is the move to the Big Ten. It's going to be a while. It's going to be a couple of years, but one of the reasons you go to USC is you can get to the playoff from there. It's going to be a little harder in the Big Ten.
Dennis, we appreciate it, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's do this again, okay?
You bet. Thanks.
Need a new grill? Academy Sports and Outdoors is the destination for your outdoor cooking needs. With our free in-store assembly and pre-assembled grills and smokers, buy online at academy.com and pick up in-store. So keep those grilling plans at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, our big game of the week could have some huge college football playoff ramifications. That's right. We're talking Ohio State and Notre Dame. And for an Ohio State point of view, we've got Kevin Noon from BuckeyeHuddle.com. And also for a Notre Dame perspective, we've got John Brice from FootballScoop.com. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, David. Appreciate you having us.
Absolutely.
Kevin, I'll start with you. That view, goodness gracious, my friend. I know that you broke into the stadium for the show. Thank you for doing that.
I'll do anything for this show. I mean, this has nothing to do with any other aspect of my job, but Ohio Stadium, the band is warming up. Everybody's getting excited about this top 5 matchup between number 2 Ohio State, number 5 Notre Dame under the lights.
It's going to be fun, so we'll keep it there with you, Kevin. How much better is this Ohio State team this year, considering we know the offense is great, but that defense could be salty this year?
Exactly, and we had the opportunity on Tuesday to speak with defensive coordinator Jim Knowles, and he said that the defense is 100% ready. Now, is that just getting ready? Is that part of the gamesmanship? I mean, you can be ready, but they're going to have to execute. I mean, they're going to have to figure out how to go against Tyler Buchner, a quarterback there's not a lot of film on. They're going to have to figure out how to stop one of the most prolific pass-catching tight ends that I can remember seeing in a while with Michael Mayer. So, I think if this defense is considerably better than what we saw last year, this is as dangerous of a team as there is out there in the nation because we know what the offense is capable of.
John, let's talk Notre Dame. And are they going to be better than they were last year? Because I feel like in the beginning of last year, they were winning games, but they weren't convincing. They kind of found their way throughout the season. What about this year?
Yeah, David, I think so. I think particularly that Notre Dame is better this year because the Fighting Irish are so much better on the offensive line. Now, look, there's a question mark with Jarrett Patterson, the fifth-year captain for the Fighting Irish after he suffered a foot injury midway through training camp. Marcus Freeman saying on Monday that Patterson is questionable for the game. But Patterson is voted one of 6 team captains. I fully expect him to do everything within his power to be out there at left guard for Notre Dame Saturday night under the lights. And Kevin, I'll be joining you there in Ohio Stadium, the Horseshoe, for that game. I'm excited to take it in. But I do think it's a better Notre Dame team, David, Kevin, because it's so much better on both lines of scrimmage, but especially on the offensive side of the ball. Last year, the Irish, especially the first 5 to 6 games of the season, were not very good on the offensive line until Joe Alt became an anchor and the true freshman became one of their starting tackles. Now, the other true freshman, much ballyhooed from a year ago, former 5-star recruit, Blake Fisher, is fully healthy. I'm telling you right now, just like Ohio State has Paris Johnson and a couple of future NFL first-rounders on its offensive line, I think Joe Alt and Blake Fisher are future first-rounders for the Notre Dame offensive line.
Kevin, let me just ask this in the friendliest way. Can Ohio State overcome a Week 1 loss?
I think Ohio State could overcome a Week 1 loss. The thing is that we sit there, we get to about Week 9, and everybody's losing their minds over there being 8 or 9 undefeated teams without realizing that 6 of them are going to play each other, and that generally we get to the end of a season and there's one undefeated team, maybe 2. I mean, maybe you end up having a group of 5 team that's kind of sitting out there, but it all sorts itself out. Now, what Ohio State can't overcome is if Ohio State comes out here and lays an egg and just looks really bad and just doesn't look like any progress has been made, because, honestly, while Ohio State does have some top 25 teams on its schedule, this is a top 5 matchup, and even week 1 and week 14 are so far apart, but you can leave a lasting impression.
John, I'm going to ask you a similar question, but considering what some people think the spread is and going to be come game time, can Notre Dame, if the goal is making the college football playoffs, overcome a bad loss?
Notre Dame could overcome a bad loss. I don't expect that to be the case Saturday night. I expect this to be anybody's contest going late into the fourth quarter, because I think there's great talent and great coaching on both sides of the football. But to Kevin's point about Ohio State's schedule, Notre Dame's is not like that, because Notre Dame's the only team in the country opening up with 2 matchups against top 4 teams, because Notre Dame has number 2 Ohio State this weekend and number 4 Clemson a little bit later in the season. Notre Dame also has a neutral site contest with BYU in Las Vegas, and it has a game late in the year at USC, and that's a USC team that I fully expect to be challenging for a college football playoff berth in year 1 under Lincoln Riley. So Notre Dame probably has a schedule more balanced to give it an avenue back into college football playoff discussion if there's a loss this weekend. And I think, frankly, this matchup this weekend is going to be more of what we're talking about for the next several years in college football. The playoff is going to expand to 12 teams. Conference affiliation is going to mean less and less. Strength of schedule is going to be more and more. That's from all the coaches I'm talking to in ACC, Big 12, SEC. That's the future of the sport. And so hopefully, for all of our sakes, we get more Notre Dame, Ohio State type matchups moving forward, because it's going to be a 12-team playoff that doesn't penalize a single loss the first week of September.
All right, John, let's keep it with you real quick. What is the key to victory for Notre Dame?
Oh, it's shortening the game for sure, David. It's shortening the game on both sides of the football. Notre Dame cannot allow Ohio State to have some of its signature 80, 75-yard scoring drives that take like a minute 40 off the clock. And that means that Notre Dame can't be giving up chunk plays the size of lakefront real estate. And the flip side of that is Notre Dame has to be able to assert its will on the line of scrimmage offensively. And that means those guys I referenced, Blake Fisher, Joe Alt, Jarrett Patterson, if he's able to play, Zeke Correll, the new starting center. That's a big one to watch. Josh Lugg, a 6-year senior at right guard. What can they do with Michael Mayer, with Kevin Bauman, and even Sherwood, the third-string tight end that they do some different things with in motion? All of those things are about sending a physical message for Notre Dame. Physicality, especially on the offensive side of the ball, therefore limiting possessions for Ohio State, to me, is the number one key for the Fighting Irish.
Kevin, what about the key point for Ohio State to take victory?
I think it all comes down to the running game on both sides. Ohio State needs to be able to run the ball. I think if you look in the games that Ohio State had some issues, Oregon, Michigan, even Utah to a certain extent, the run wasn't there when it needed it. I think that they have to be able to get Trevion Henderson and Mayan Williams loose. And if they can do that, while Ohio State can score a lot of times in a buck 05, a buck 30, maybe some prolonged drives. And then on the other side, take away Notre Dame's ability to run. Don't let Tyler Buchner beat you with his legs. Just don't make Notre Dame one-dimensional. Make them show that they can beat you by throwing the ball with Buchner, especially since they're the Fighting Irish are a little thin in the receiver core. Try and see if Lorenzo Styles Jr. and his homecoming back to Columbus can sit there and have a big game. But I think that it really comes down to the run game on both sides.
That is Kevin Noon, BuckeyeHuddle.com, and John Brice, FootballScoop.com. Gentlemen, thanks so much. We'll see how the game plays out. Get you back on here real soon.
Appreciate it, David. Have a great day.
Absolutely.
All right, so Arkansas had a fantastic 2021. What do they do for an encore here in 2022? A lot of people say they're the second-best team in the SEC West, maybe the third. A&M says, yeah, I hope it's not second, although the Aggies are trying to get first. Let's talk about it with a insider who has covered the team as a TV personality and also on the sidelines for the SEC Network and, of course, on ESPN. Tera Talmadge joining us here on the show. Tera, how are you?
I'm doing good. It is finally game week, so I think we're all pretty excited to get this season underway.
So lots of preseason hype for Arkansas. Help me understand it. Is it because the 9 wins I don't want to say came out of nowhere, but they weren't expected last year, and now people kind of expect that kind of season every year?
Yeah, I think it definitely is fair to say that it kind of came out of nowhere. I don't think that fans were expecting them to do as well as they did. It was a nice surprise, but now the bar has been raised. I think there's new standards for the program. So going into this new season, they're hoping for 10 wins. I don't know if 10 wins is going to happen, but I definitely think it's possible.
Talking to Tera Talmadge here on Up to the Second College Football. So offensively, look, KJ Jefferson's a dynamic quarterback, no doubt about that. But replacing Treylon Burks is going to be very difficult. How does Arkansas replace such a stud at that position who's now in the NFL?
You need a lot of guys to replace what Treylon Burks did for the University of Arkansas. Thankfully, though, they've got a couple that I think are going to be big time for the Razorbacks this year. You've got Jaden Hazelwood, who came in from OU, and everyone's really excited about him and getting to see him finally in action. So I think he is going to be a big time playmaker. They've also got Warren Thompson in there as well. They've got guys that can fill the void. It's going to be interesting to see, though, who really steps up.
Terry, Arkansas had a tough and a great game. I shouldn't say tough, but I guess it was a tough opponent to start the season off with Texas last year, and they mopped the floor with them. Is Cincinnati kind of in that same kind of respect that if Arkansas can take care of business against a very good Cincinnati team, they kind of can move on? Because the top part of the schedule is kind of difficult.
It is pretty difficult. I know that they're obviously looking to have another successful start to the season, but you also don't want like your best game of the year to come in your first game. Like you want to be progressively getting better throughout the year. I think we're going to see a lot of adjustments after this game, and it's going to be interesting to see how Luke Fickell and Cincinnati play this one too. Like they're being very under wraps about who their starting quarterback is, who some of like their depth chart is a little leaves a little bit to be desired for this Arkansas staff and what to plan for. So it's going to be fun. I do think that having them come into Arkansas after another great year, it's going to be good for the Razorbacks to have a packed house at 2:30. They've got SEC Nation there as well. There's a lot of hype surrounding this one.
So you mentioned they want to play their best football at the end of the year, but they also have a tough start to their season. So last year, what was their best game? Was it the Texas game? Was it the A&M game? Was it potentially the overtime loss to Ole Miss? Where was their best game, or which one was it?
You know, I think if you're a fan, everyone loved that Texas game. It was just such a great atmosphere, and it was a fun thing to be a part of. But if you're a team, I think you'd go with something else. That Ole Miss game was a great game. I think they played it extremely well. And at the end of it, Sam Pittman just went for it. And you can't fault him for doing it either. So I think that would probably be one of my favorite games and one of the top performances from them this year or past year.
So what happened with some of the transfers recently, and how much did people just love the way Sam Pittman responded to it?
You know, Sam Pittman has had to deal with that question several times now in terms of guys who have left the program. This was interesting because the two guys chose to leave, you know, pretty late in the year. So now they have to pretty much hold on to those scholarships. And it's not ideal for Sam Pittman and the program. But the way that he handles it is just by saying, like, if you're not wanting to be a part of this program, then enter the portal. That's what it's for. He's not trashing them. It just sometimes things just don't work out.
Talking to Tera Talmadge here. So is Cincinnati a bigger test because they went to the college football playoffs last year, but they're a completely different team this year? Or South Carolina, a team that people are like, well, they've got Spencer Rattler, but they're still South Carolina. Which is a tougher matchup?
I actually would go with South Carolina. I think that's going to be – everyone's so hyped up about Spencer Rattler. I think he's got a lot to prove, obviously, this year, even early on. Everyone is excited about Cincinnati, but like you mentioned, they're not the same team that they were. They're missing a lot of guys. Their O-line looks good, but there's still just going to be a lot of changes for that team. And I know that it's going to be kind of a learning curve for them in that first game as well.
That is Tera Talmadge here on Up to the Second College Football. Tera, thank you so much. We'll be talking, I know, in a couple of weeks when A&M and Arkansas face off, and maybe even next week with the South Carolina game.
That sounds good. Looking forward to it.
At Academy Sports and Outdoors, bikes for the whole family are just a click away. Buy online at academy.com with our free in-store assembly. Your next set of wheels, plus helmets, pads, and water bottles will be waiting for you at our in-store pickup counter. Get to the fun faster with our in-store pickup and free assembly at Academy Sports and Outdoors.
All right, got a big one this weekend. Georgia taking on Oregon 0 week. You got Dan Lanning taking on his, actually week 1, I should say, taking on his old team here. We're going to break it all down with an insider, Jordan Hill of Dawgs 247, joining the program. Jordan, thanks for joining the show.
Yeah, absolutely. A big week of college football. And like you said, ready for Saturday, a very interesting game in Mercedes Benz there in Atlanta.
So I think this is an easy question to start off with, but I'll start it off here. Was Clemson last year a tougher test starting off the season, or Oregon this year, considering the way Clemson's season went on?
I think so, but there are definitely challenges with this game, and it's something I asked Kirby Smart about yesterday. There's a lot of unknowns with this Oregon team. A whole new coaching staff, like you said, Dan Lanning coming from Georgia and taking over there in Oregon. And the fact that Oregon brought in 11 transfers from last year, really taking advantage of the transfer portal. Stetson Bennett talked about it last night when we had a chance to talk to him. He said, when you're preparing for one team, you kind of have to watch 4 different teams just to get tape on different guys, players who were at different schools last year. So I still think Clemson was probably a bigger challenge just because of the talent, especially at the defensive line Clemson had and the challenge Georgia had against them. But it's a very unique challenge in facing this Oregon team. And, I think there's a lot of things, even, looking like Bo Nix, the quarterback that was at Auburn, a lot of unknowns as far as what exactly this is going to look like from Oregon.
Right. And my favorite thing about college football is I feel like every coach is connected in some way. Like you said earlier, Dan Lanning was at Georgia for the last 3 years, but he also coached 2015 at Alabama while Kirby Smart was there. So another branch of the Saban tree. But can you tell me, what did Dan Lanning mean to that Georgia coaching staff?
I think he was huge. And I think the way he worked with those other guys, Glenn Schumann, and the fact too, Kirby talked about it yesterday when he had a chance to meet with the media. He was very impressed going back to, like you mentioned, when Dan was at Alabama. He got to see how he worked and how he went about his business. And, there were a lot of questions when Mel Tucker left the Georgia staff, when he took that Colorado job and left, what the defense was going to do, what they were going to be able if they were going to be able to replicate the success they had with Mel running the defense. And Dan stepped up. When he first was hired, he was at Memphis and wasn't a big name, wasn't a guy that, when he was hired, he didn't turn heads or really get a lot of noise, but he did such a good job. It was a seamless transition these last few years for Georgia. The defense has only gotten better and better. And then you come off of a 2021 year where they only gave up a little bit over 10 points per game. So he was huge. There are guys that are still on that staff, and Kirby Smart also plays a big role in running that defense. But, I think that was a significant loss in losing Dan Lanning. And then very interesting just to see that his very first game is going to come against these Bulldogs. And, he knows about some of these guys on defense. He probably knows a few weaknesses as far as some of those guys are concerned. And it just kind of adds another layer to what we know is going to be a very interesting game for Georgia, first game since that national championship.
Jordan, I'm guilty of this, but how about the most scrutinized quarterback in college football, Stetson Bennett, who played his best football at the end of last season, yet here he is this year. How big does he have to be for this Georgia team to be able to repeat, considering the defense will certainly look different?
I think it's crucial, especially early in the year, because they're going to be breaking in pretty much 8 new starters on defense. But he benefits from something that I think people lose sight of. He's had first-team reps all year. This is a guy that during fall camp last season, there was a time when he was taking third-team reps. And, as it kind of went through, and JT Daniels, at one point, JT Daniels, before the season had started, was the betting favorite to win the Heisman. There was so much hype around JT, and obviously he had gotten the bulk of the work and the reps with the first team. And then you kind of just had Stetson thrown in there because JT got hurt early in the year in that second game. Very different situation this year, given he's been taking all the first team reps. He's had a chance to really bolster those relationships with the receivers and the tight ends as well. I think he's trusted. We talked about this on a podcast we did this week. I expect him to up some of those statistics we saw from last year, more passing yards, maybe a few more passing touchdowns. He is really looked at as the guy. They trust him. I think he's going to have an opportunity to make plays, and he's working with a pass catching group, the receivers and the tight ends as well, that are just extremely, extremely deep. I think he has a chance to really make a lot of plays, and he's got a lot of playmakers around him.
Right. And speaking of tight ends, we've got to talk about Brock Bowers. Now, as a freshman last year, he was named first team All-SEC. So can you kind of give us a rundown of what he really means to that offense now coming into just his second year?
Yeah, I mean, he's huge. And the thing that makes him so unique is he has the physicality to block and to make plays. But, I mean, he's got kind of deceptive speed, and the way that he fits into this offense, I'm very curious because, he made so many plays last year and it was kind of out of necessity. Georgia had a lot of injuries at receiver, George Pickens obviously being a big one. People are seeing what he's doing with the Steelers now. They really needed somebody to step up, and Brock did that. This year, they've got a lot more playmakers, at least going into the season, and even at the position. Darnell Washington, Eric Gilbert has gotten a lot of praise as well. I don't know if he'll put up quite the numbers that he did last year, but I think Brock is set to have another very good season, and I think he'll be the leader of those tight ends, and I think it's a group that Georgia understands. I don't know if there is a deeper tight end room in the entire country. I think they're going to work to take advantage of that, maybe get some of those tight ends on the field at the same time, really create some mismatches, again, led by Bowers when it comes to facing some of these defenses.
Jordan, I know coaches don't like to look ahead, but we're media, so we can look ahead. When is Georgia's, I guess, most difficult game past Oregon? When is that first game where we're going to be like, after this Oregon game, all right, now we're being tested?
There's a few points in the schedule. I do look at the game against South Carolina. I think that might be September 17th. And it's sort of the situation where it's not only having to play in Columbia, but it's going to be at like noon. And so it's going to be about 90 degrees in Williams-Brice. It's going to be a very hot environment. Georgia is going to get a bit of an advantage in the fact they'll be playing South Carolina after the Gamecocks went to Fayetteville and played Arkansas. So that should be a really physical game. Really, other than that, the part of the schedule that really strikes me as being something to watch and something that could be a challenge is the very end. Playing Tennessee, playing at Mississippi State, playing at Kentucky to finish the conference part of the schedule. Those are going to be some really tough tests in early November into mid-November, and then you have to factor in how healthy Georgia is at that point in the season. The two games that I have circled that I think could be the most trouble Georgia has is at Mississippi State and at Kentucky. Closing out the year, playing again, especially Mississippi State. We know those Mike Leach offenses can give teams trouble, but I think it's a pretty manageable schedule on the whole for Georgia. The biggest part when you get to the end of the year, you just got to be healthy.
And we heard at SEC Media Days, Coach Smart said, quote, "We will not be hunted. The hunting will be from us." So do you think that's easier said than done? And do you think that Georgia has enough weapons in the arsenal to be able to do that?
I think they do, and I think part of that is sort of the mindset that Kirby Smart has had all along. I mean, he gets compared a lot of the time to Nick Saban, and I think it's two coaches with a very similar mindset. I mean, these guys are competitors. These guys are not satisfied, and that's something that, going back to the very first media availability we had back in the spring, Kirby talked about, look, the preparation didn't change. The fact we won the national championship, it didn't change. It was the same schedule. Started a little bit later in the year because they played January 10th. That's much farther into the season or into the calendar that Georgia's gone compared to past years. He said, but we had the same workout schedule. We had the same attack and approach to a new season. They understand this is a new team. They feel like a lot of the guys that accomplished quite a bit last year, they're in the NFL now. 15 guys drafted off that championship team. I do think they have the talent. I think that particularly on defense, maybe early on, we're going to see some growing pains, but I think the schedule sets up well for them to be the hunted. Everybody's looking at them. And I think really, to me, the biggest test is going to be if they are able to win the East. It's how they handle going to Atlanta and playing who I really feel like will be the Alabama Crimson Tide with another marquee matchup.
There he is. That is Jordan Hill, Dawgs 247. Jordan, we appreciate your time, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us. Let's do it again.
Yeah, appreciate you guys.
All right, that wraps up week number 1 of Up to the Second College Football presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. What was your favorite part of the show? Me?
I got to say me, but okay. I'll give you one this week.
All right, we'll have a lot more for you next week. Thanks so much for watching. And again, thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors.